Hello, hello, and welcome. We will allow maybe 1 more minute until people join. In the meantime, feel free to let us know where you're joining from. You can send us a message in the chat. I can maybe start first. I'm joining today from Lisbon, Portugal.
I'm from London in the UK.
And I'm in the USA in Maryland.
Nice. Awesome. We have all possible time zones here, but Candice, we have the same one. Yeah, I'm very happy to be on a webinar today. So today we're going to be talking about the 2023 Metabase Community Data Stack report. This is a report we prepared based on a survey we sent out to our community earlier this year. Where we kind of ask a lot of questions about the data stack preferences, the state of the data stack, and also a number of other related questions that allowed us to build an interesting, report and kind of gather some insights that we are happy to share today. So with me today, Candice and Jacob. Candice, could you maybe introduce yourself, and Jacob too?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Candice, co-founder of 173 Tech. We are a data analytics agency, helping startups and scale-ups make the most out of their data. We've been using Metabase since 2019. We've been one of the first official partners, and we have a lot of very exciting use cases with our clients across both sides of the ocean. Some names, American side, MeUndies, Peppa Pig. On this side, lots of e-commerce SaaS brands. Very excited to be here today and talk about the data stack, one of our favorite topics. Thank you so much for having me, Margaret.
Thank you, Candice.
And I'm Jacob Joseph. I'm a success engineer at Metabase. I've used Metabase for about the past 5 years and worked for Metabase the past 1. Got about 15 years experience working with data engineering, web development, information visualization. I've worked in a lot of different industries: education, healthcare, manufacturing, entertainment, bunch of random stuff like that. So happy to be here and excited to talk about the survey results.
Thank you. Yeah, so the format today that we'll try to follow is we're gonna go over the report, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'll send a link in the chat so you can take a look. And we decided to kind of have a discussion, and see whether the insights we found are kind of correspond to what people see in the real world. So our report is based on 189 responses. Many of the responses come from Metabase community, and there are a number of insights we found. And we invited Candice as she represents the she's the founder of the data consultancy, right? So she kind of represents the market. She works with a lot of startups and scale-ups, and she can see what is really going on out there. And Jacob is coming from Metabase team, so he's in more close communication with Metabase users. So I think he can also tell us whether this is more about our community or rather applicable to the more broader industry. So with that, I will share my screen right now, and let's see if I can do this. Okay. Again, if you can't see the screen, or if you can hear us or anything else, please let us know in the chat. Also, please feel free to ask your questions. We will be happy to pick them up and discuss them as we are in the talk. And just before we start, I want to show you around the report. So basically, we're going to go over each insight that we found right here. But I also encourage you to check out the dashboard. So the report is kind of a written story about what we found. But if you go to the dashboard, you can actually dive into the data, and you can, it's kind of split by different tabs. So like an overall introduction, overview of who we asked, who was the participants of the survey. Then also like the state of responders, like, where they're joining from, what kind of companies they represent, even, their average role satisfaction score. And then, like different tabs split by different kind of directions, like the data storage, the data analytics, ingestion tools, and so on. Okay, so I'm coming back to the main report, and I think we can start with the very first insight. And I will stop right here on this chart. The insight sounds like this. The larger companies are more likely to choose a data tool if it's open source. This is what we saw. This is the insight we got. And yeah, I'm happy to hear Candice and Jacob, what do you think about it? Do you think it looks surprising or not really? Do you see this often?
Yeah, so I don't think it's surprising at all. I think it's quite common across all sizes of companies, actually, the preference towards open source, especially, fast growing and tech-driven companies. I think the key words here is really flexibility. So I know you have the reason being open source, the reason being scalability, performance. I think once you have an open source tool, you have a lot of control over a lot of things. So you can optimize it, which relates to the performance side. You can build it in a way that's really scalable. So it does cover a few other areas just because the nature of open source. Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think open source is prioritized primarily because of that flexibility, and especially in the data community, there's a history of vendor lock-in, especially in the tools from like the early 2000s. And so I think a lot of people have sort of rejected that model where you invest a lot of money in your data infrastructure and then you can't get it out if you want to use another tool, or you can't use it with these other tools. So I think interoperability and modularity kind of go hand in hand with a lot of open source stuff. And I think that's part of why it's prioritized.
Yeah, 100%. Like we have a preference towards open source tools as well when we help our clients build their data stack. That precisely that point about lock-in, and sometimes also data lock-in as well. So data being trapped somewhere else is a big concern. So definitely open source is the way to go.
And I think a couple other points just on this chart here, like the familiarity with team was ranked really high. And I think that's so important on any new data projects, is like start with what you know. You can always expand it, grow it, change it, but like there's no need to like learn a whole bunch of new stuff. If you have a familiar tool, like definitely go with that. Makes a lot of sense. It's good advice.
Yeah. Do you think open source is a bit easier to learn as well? I have that feeling compared to, yeah.
I think in a lot of cases because it's more approachable. So there's no like barrier to entry. Like with proprietary software, oftentimes you can't even try it because you have to pay or you have to get a demo, like you have to work with sales to even get an access to it. And so there's definitely a barrier there. Whereas like if you can just download it and run it on your laptop or whatever, it makes it much easier to get some experience, to go through the documentation. And I think you're right on that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question here. Yeah, Candice and Jacob, if you can maybe think of something. Are there any industries you've noticed oppose open source?
Healthcare. I've seen a lot of opposition there. It depends on the venue, but like big hospitals have had and hospital systems have had a lot of skepticism about using open source, and that's changing, but it's been slow to change. And anywhere, defense as well, it definitely has, they use tons of open source stuff, but there's definitely a lot of hesitancy there for different reasons. So there's definitely a few industries where there's either higher security or higher regulation where open source has definitely been picked up and is used, but it's much harder to get your open source product into those industries than to get a proprietary product in a lot of cases.
100% agree. Like highly regulated industries tend to have these concerns. Finance as well, financial services is another one. And also, I guess, companies that's probably bit bigger, more enterprise-sized. I know you said here, larger companies are more likely, but we do see enterprise companies that have slightly more risk adverse, and they would like to have proprietary product that they have previously worked with or have an association with the parent company at least. So yeah, those will be the industries that are opposed to open source generally.
And I think to your point, Candice, having the company attached to the product is really important to a lot of folks. And there are open source products. I mean, like Metabase, like Mozilla, like there's different organizations and companies that add some stability to open source products. And I think that makes a big difference in their ability to like work in enterprise environments for sure.
Thank you. Jumping back to the report and going to the next insight. And here we see the most common upstream tools that is used by the responders. And the insight we got is customer data is more valuable than ever, but social media and not so much. Would you agree with that? Is it surprising or not really?
It is surprising to me because we see a lot of companies integrating marketing stack. So it's not surprising customer data is super valuable. With the iOS 14 changes, a lot of people need to have data visibility. So first-party data has been, the key words for the past couple of years. Social media data, we see that integrated more and more. I think if it's not as popular, my guess will be first, marketing teams tend to be in a bit of a data silo. They have their own tools, like they probably stay within Google Analytics or stay within the Facebook environment to get their insights. But we're seeing more and more moving into their own centralized data stack, so they can have the end-to-end visibility. So not just how much you're spending, how many people you're getting from that campaign, but also what is the lifetime value? What's the quality of those users? So we're seeing more social media data being integrated. It's probably not as fast as we hope the case. So that's probably what we're seeing here. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, I think so. Of the survey respondents, about almost 90% were Metabase users. So we have a skew a bit towards that. And I think our Metabase user base, I would say, is kind of split maybe three ways between operational data, marketing, sales, revenue data, and then I think the third one is maybe like customer data that they're delivering back, like in embedded scenarios and things like that. And so to me, this makes a lot of sense as potential upstream sources, but I don't think it shows a full picture of Metabase as a whole, or just from what I've seen. Like one thing that's missing here that I would expect is financial system data. Lots of our customers are putting their QuickBooks or their like SAP or whatever financial system they're using. They're importing data into their data warehouse and using it with Metabase, and I'm not seeing that represented here. So this is one where I'm kind of a little surprising to me, but the overall ratios in what's shown here does make, like, I think absolutely we see a ton of people with Zendesk data, a lot of Segment, a lot of Stripe, a lot of Salesforce. So I don't think this is like off, but I don't think it's like a full representation of either Metabase users or the wider industry.
Yeah, and by the way, I will try to find a link and post it in the chat. We recently had a webinar about how we use Metabase to visualize customer data, and we have a lot of data from Zendesk coming into Metabase, and we built our own dashboards there. So it's one of the use cases, I would say. Okay, coming back to the report and going a little bit down here. So the next insights sound like this. Even with all the options on the market, most companies still keep data ingestion in-house, and we can see that it definitely stays on the first place. Next comes Airbyte, then Fivetran. Would you agree with this insight, or is it surprising?
I personally found it quite surprising. I guess it's to do with our philosophy when it comes to data stack. What we always suggest is if there is a cost and time-effective way to ingest the data, that typically being Airbyte or Fivetran. Airbyte completely open source, so that's very cost effective. Fivetran has a whole lot of connectors available, so it's very time effective, resource effective. So our principle is always use those tools, to get you off started quickly, and then complement that in parallel with your in-house tool. So there might be connectors that's not available within this, off-the-shelf tools. So then you develop your own in-house solution. So likely a custom script in Python, and that could run in parallel to this tool. So yeah, maybe the industry is changing. Jacob, what's your take?
Yeah, I would say I was surprised at the lead that in-house had, but not as much that it was in the top. Definitely like the top like 5, I would say, are absolutely what I'm seeing as the most common kind of across the industry. Or maybe even the top 10, or like I'm definitely seeing people using like everything down to Azure Data Factory fairly regularly, and in that ratio. So like one thing I would perceive about this is I think Airbyte has gained popularity recently, and it's sort of on an upward trend. So I would expect a year ago Airbyte to maybe have been half of Fivetran, and maybe a year from now I would sort of expect the in-house to shrink and Airbyte to be filling in that gap, because I think a lot of folks that have been building their own are starting to realize they can use Airbyte in a way that like some of the other open source tools like Airflow, Dagster, there's a handful of those others that sort of gained popularity a few years ago, are less approachable if you're building your own, versus I think Airbyte is more approachable if you're building your own.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Airbyte has been growing really fast, from the companies we speak to, and it is very, as you said, approachable. It's very easy to onboard within your data stack, and compared to developing in-house and having to maintain that connector is a lot more cost-effective and resource-effective. So 100%.
And for those who watching us right now, let us know if you are using the in-house built ingestion tool, or if you're using one of those tools available on the market. You can let us know in the chat. Okay, coming further, and the next one is actually pretty similar, but about the data catalogs. And we can see that most of the responders also said that they use in-house built data catalogs rather than choosing a specific tool on the market. And I'm curious, Candice and Jacob, what do you think about this?
So my point might be a bit controversial here. I think, when company decided they need a data catalog tool, or they have this need, it's probably because they have a underlying problem that's not actually related to the use case of data cataloging. So, if we think about what people want with a tool for the catalog, is typically for data discoverability. So people, define what data they can make use of, data definitions. So, the challenge there will be, okay, why my data in GA4 not match my dashboard, or, this active user is completely off compared to a different source. And then the third probably is the lineage. So where does data come from? So you have a number at the end. You want to know, okay, what's the source? How do I match it to the source of truth? So those are the key, probably 3 challenges people would have. At that point, they think, okay, data catalog is going to come and solve my problem. But the underlying, root cause, or how to solve this problem, is actually, instead of looking at what you have in the data, going back to the purpose of the data. So, what is the goal? What are the questions you're trying to ask? That will then lead you to what we like to call a data dictionary. So that's a definition of all your data points. And then within that, once you have that, you solve both the discoverability, because everyone has a central document to go through, and to know, okay, Metabase has this dashboard, it shows active users, and this is what it means, and this is where it's coming from. That's the purpose of a data dictionary. You don't actually need a tool to have a data dictionary. I mean, you can use like G Sheet, a Google Doc or G Sheet, Notion. It's more like a mentality rather than a tool that help you do that. So I think that's probably, so instead of looking from the data, looking from what's the business need of the data. So that's, I'm not surprised, and I think that's why. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. And I think to one of your points, most of the data catalogs on this list don't actually solve those problems. Most of them are really effective at like delivering data to a wide audience that you don't know very well. And one of the problems that happens is like, it sort of breaks the lineage issue, or it doesn't solve the lineage issue, is like, you go to the data catalog, you check out the data, and then you put it somewhere else, like a Python script, a BI tool, another database for analysis, whatever. And so then you've got this, like, you've broken the chain, and so you can't, and then all the other analysis that happens onto it doesn't tie back all the way. So like, I think Glue is a little bit different because it sort of catalogs data in data lakes and basically sort of prepares an index that an analysis tool or whatever can use, versus some of the others are not really, because Glue doesn't really deliver much to people users. It delivers a lot to like compute, like other programs, other software, versus the other tools on the list are all geared towards like a person using it. And yeah, they just don't solve those 3 problems you mentioned that are what most people are looking for. And so yeah, like a spreadsheet that's like shared, like at Metabase we use like one that's I think in either Notion or Google Sheets, but like it's something we can all comment on, that we list out the data, the different data sources in our internal instances, where they come from, who owns them. Like, it's really important to have that, just in your organization if you have more than one data source, essentially. But yeah, there's not a tool that solves it well.
I think you had a really great point there, is the target audience. There's different roles here that needs that visibility. So it's not just the data people, the analysts, the data engineers, but also the business users, right, and consumers of the data. And all these people need different things, out of this data catalog concept. And the tools here are defined per role, not for the overarching problem. That is precisely your point. Everyone needs to be on the same page. They need to collaborate. They need to create this thing together. It's not data engineer do the data engineering documentation, analyst do the analyst documentation, and then the business user just get what they're given. right? Everyone need to be involved. So what you've done at Metabase is 100%, the right way to go about it. Business user define what they want, and then, up to the data engineer, analyst to start translating that back to the data. And then you end up with this centralized, forever maintained, they will be growing, will be changing, and will be maintained by everyone. It sounds like everyone has a responsibility to keep that up to date, and to contribute to the definitions of it as well. So I think that's a key thing, the collaboration of all teams.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That makes sense. Thank you, Candice. Thank you, Jacob. The next, I would say, cluster of the insights is about, so we asked people about how self-serve they think their companies are, how happy they are with their roles, and we kind of, played around with the data to see whether there is any correlation between that and different factors. So I would say that the next insights are corresponding to that. So let's start with this one. So we asked people what analytics database they use, and also we kind of tried to compare that with the average role satisfaction score. Turned out that MySQL had the lowest score and Postgres had the highest score. Candice, Jacob, what do you think of this one?
I'll let Jacob start. Yeah.
Yeah, so this makes total sense. When I started working with databases, I think I probably started with a MySQL database. And one of the issues with MySQL, MariaDB, which is similar, the open source version now, and there are a lot of limitations in scaling. And so there's a lot of performance issues that come up. There's a lot of functions, like missing functionality that's available in SQL Server, Postgres, many other databases that's not in MySQL and MariaDB. So I think what happens is people grab it because, like we were talking about earlier, it's awesome to use the tools you're familiar with. Definitely start there. But MySQL and MariaDB don't really scale very well. And that's where I see our customers, our users, like hitting the ceiling on what they can do with MySQL and really needing a more thorough implementation of a database.
Yeah, I would say, Postgres is definitely one of the most popular backend databases we see among our clients. I would add here, though, when it comes to analytics, probably data warehouse is the way to go, because Postgres really, really remarkable what you can do as far as a database goes, but you will reach its limits at some point as well as you scale. When you have a lot of volume of data, a lot of requests to the data, it's not optimized primarily for analytics. It's more an operational database, so you will reach a limit at some point. So I think here probably is more reflective of the main use case of Metabase. We see more in the market, people will be on the data warehouse, the likes of BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift. Those are probably the more common, and we see a lot of amazing use cases when Metabase sits on top of those data warehouse, when it combines all the data sources, it's modeled, and you can get a really fuller picture about your customers.
Absolutely. And yeah, to your point, I think a lot of folks start with a database when they have smaller data, like less than a couple million rows, or it doesn't grow very fast, or things like that. And it's like, their first data analytics project, they've got an RDS, so they've got an Azure database. So they just use the databases they have, the infrastructure they have. And the great point you made as well, like for anything where you do have increasing volumes of data, velocity of data, Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, I'm probably forgetting one that's pretty major, but those are definitely much more effective. And they have different specialties, right? Like there's different things that each of those is maybe better or worse at. But in general, those are the three that we see. And if you look at the wider survey results, like those show up as well.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Metabase, right? If you have like a operational database and you want some insights without going through, building that whole data stack, you can already do so. And when you migrate to a centralized data warehouse later on, combining all data sources, you can still use Metabase. You just swap out the data source. So, that flexibility is there.
Yeah, I think definitely these results can be also related to the fact that most of the responders were Metabase users. So yeah, it's probably a little bit from that side. But going a little bit down here, I'm also, and it's also about the analytics databases, but this time it's more about the average self-service score given by the responders. And, we try to compare this response with what kind of analytics database they use. And we also saw that Postgres had the highest self-service score.
Would you mind defining self-service score? Like, what was the question that score answered? Or?
Yeah, so I think the question was how self-serve is your company in your opinion on the scale from 1 to 10, and then each responder kind of scored whether they are self-service or not really.
Cool.
I don't know enough to go deeper than, I think this is more like a correlation instead of a causation. I think if you pick a better database, then you're probably more likely to be self-service, more data-driven. Instead of, because you're using Postgres, you're more self-service. That's my guess. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, so the differences between these are pretty small, so there's not like huge gains. I would say it makes sense that the Microsoft SQL Server is a little bit lower in that the folks I've seen that use Microsoft SQL Server the most have slightly more isolated IT teams or IT function. And so they might have a dedicated IT function that's managing their servers and whatnot. It's maybe a little less embedded in teams versus where if you have a data analyst on a team as opposed to outside of the IT department or data function specifically, like embedded in a team, I'm seeing a little more like whatever tools are available, Postgres, MySQL. And so there may be a little bit of that, but again, they're so close that it's kind of conjecture. I don't know that it fully validates that.
Okay, got it. Let's then jump to the next one. I think it's an interesting. It kind of makes sense to me, but curious to hear what you think. So here is the change of the self-service score based on whether the team is localized or is it distributed, and also based on the region, I would say, right? So we can see here that the distributed team scored themselves to have the highest self-service score, and then we go kind of down based on the region. So it was interesting to me. Curious what you think of that too, Jacob. Look at these.
I'm trying to see the regional differences. I don't know what's happening in Middle East and Central America there, but I'm not surprised the distributed team has higher, because the nature of it, they probably need to be a bit more self-service in everything. It's more like a need, given that the time zone differences, we're probably feeling that here already. So you probably need to do a lot of things yourself. So that determines the rest. This is South America has the highest score here. I would have guessed Europe and North America, but that's probably my own ignorance. Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I think again, so on the Africa, Central America, Middle East, I think those are just small sample size, like just 1 or 2 responses each. So probably just outliers, or you need more data on those. On the others, yeah, totally agree. Distributed teams like necessitate sort of asynchronous work, which sort of means you need a little more self-service access to things, or that self-service enables asynchronous work a little bit better. So it totally makes sense. On the country differences, yeah, I find them fascinating. From a North America perspective, I know that like in a lot of different industries I've worked in, self-service data was avoided a bit because of like politics. And so like you wanted to have your narrative from your department, and you sort of had your own data to back that up, and it wasn't like company data that was widely shared. So there may be some of that culturally coming into play. Like that's the only thing that kind of with this like stands out to me is maybe there's some the way business culture is in North America versus the way it is in South America or Asia might vary a little bit. But that's all I've got on those.
That's really interesting. It's very unfortunate.
It's I think it's changing and has changed a lot, but just like yeah, I've seen that in a lot of different places, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's in the ideal world, everyone has access to the same data across the company. You have one narrative. I think, instead of I have my own data, I'm gonna tweak it the way I want. We got to be objective with the performance of the business instead of having that manipulation is not the word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And the last insight is this one. So data analysts tend to say that their companies are lower in self-service score compared to their peers from engineering or C-level people. What would you say on that?
For me, I think they're probably twofold reason. One, I guess data analysts, the objective of their work is make others' role more self-service, and the remaining role of theirs is to dig deeper about the data. So if they have more self-service, I probably would be a bit concerned. And their role is about going into the type of question that can't be self-served by the rest of the company, finding the insights. And also, I don't know if this is true across, but from lots of the data teams have met ourselves as well, data people tend to be very critical about their work. They always think, there are always things to improve, never good enough. So I think there might be an element of that here as well. So they're actually more self-service than they think they are.
Yeah, that's what my thought on this too was that data people tend to be very critical of their own work, and I think that's great. That's awesome, but it definitely like I think that affects this for sure.
Yeah, things can always be improved. Nothing is perfect. There's always new data sources they want to integrate. There's always a bigger story they want to tell, and as the result of that it's just never good enough.
Yep.
That makes sense. I think that was the last insight from the report. But if you have any questions or observations or your thoughts about the insights we found, let us know in the chat. We will answer your questions right now at the end of the webinar. Yeah, and in the meantime, Candice, Jacob, if you have anything else that you found interesting from the report or the dashboard, or your general feeling about the survey, let us know too while we're waiting for the questions.
Yeah. Sorry, Jacob.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say there's definitely more questions to be answered, from this. I'd love to see like a follow-up with a wider audience, maybe like a 50-50 split between Metabase and non-Metabase users. That would be quite interesting. But overall, I think it's fascinating. It's really great what you found here.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in next year. So one of the things that like excites me the most is that year-to-year comparison, how things are changing and shifting. And so to me, it's like this is kind of maybe setting a little bit of a baseline, and next year, like hopefully reach a wider audience, and also like be able to do those what was it last year? What is it this year? And I think there's some interesting potential trends and lots of potential research that this makes me want to do. So
yeah, definitely, I agree. It's definitely our first take in doing this kind of surveys. Learning about the community and what they choose, and definitely agree that doing this kind of on the time scale within different years and compare will be interesting. So yeah, hopefully we can get to that next year. I didn't see any questions in the chat, so I assume there are no questions. And I think with that, we'll be wrapping up the webinar. Candice, Jacob, thank you very much for joining and for providing your thoughts on the insights we found. The recording of it will be available to everyone who joined. So take a look. It will be sent to you right after. Thank you very much again to everyone who joined today, and we'll see you on our next webinars.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.